today have a 6-3 majority of liberal activists on the Supreme Court. That is how important this issue is. Well, our next speaker is Chief Counsel and Policy Director of the Judicial Crisis Network. She was previously a law clerk to U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who you just saw profiled, and regularly files briefs in high-profile Supreme Court cases. She has testified before Congress on assorted constitutional issues and briefed senators on judicial nominations. She's a graduate of Duke University, Harvard Law School, and holds a master's degree in linguistics from Michigan State University. She is one smart Bible thumper, let me tell you. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Carrie Severino.
Thank you so much. Isn't that a powerful trailer? This movie is coming out on Justice Thomas, and I just can't wait to see the whole thing, because all of you who lived through that, like me, realize what an amazing moment that was in our country, to see a man targeted in that way, and then to see his courage and strength in standing up. And one of the biggest privileges of my life was working for him, getting to know him, the amazing man, the leader, the mentor that he is. That really led to what I have done later in my life. I spent most of my career now, after working for Justice Thomas, working to get good constitutionalist judges confirmed, because we've seen that nothing scares the left more than the idea of having a judge who's going to be faithful to the Constitution on the Supreme Court of the United States. If you look through history, it's interesting. Nowadays, we kind of take these high-stakes judicial fights for granted, but historically it wasn't always so, and it often wasn't so because Republicans weren't, in fact, nominating judges like that. You know, some of the most liberal justices on our Supreme Court's history, like Earl Warren, they were nominated by Republicans. And for a long time, the left was very successful at using the courts to achieve in American government what they couldn't do through the democratic process. So if they weren't able to get Congress to pass the laws they wanted or the president to sign them, they had another route. It was democracy by other means, effectively, and they would go to the unelected judges on the Supreme Court, who all too often were perfectly happy to enact policies that were too extreme for the American people. That's why the representatives didn't want to do them. So you had judges who were completely complicit in this agenda. That began to change with Ed Meese and Ronald Reagan, who said, we need to have people who are going to be faithful to the Constitution and make sure that they have a judicial philosophy that says the Constitution and the law is first, not some political agenda. That was so threatening that we started to see a new era of Supreme Court nominations. Everyone remember Judge Bork and what happened to him in 1987, right? There was a few reasons that happened to him and not to Scalia, for example, before him. And one of them is that we lost control of the Senate in the meantime. It was a reminder of everyone that if you don't control the other body of government that's going to be confirming judges, you're going to have a hard time of it. If you're nominating someone who's going to threaten the judicial hegemony of the left, if you're going to go along with them, it's fine, everyone gets confirmed. But once they have an opportunity to block a good judge, they will. And the other thing that was so important is he was replacing a swing vote on the court. And they knew that when the stakes were high, potential for shifting the Supreme Court, it was just a perfect storm. The stakes were very high. They knew they had an opening because they had captured the Senate, and the left moved in for the kill, and unfortunately were able to destroy a nominee who would have been an amazing member of the Supreme Court, using smears, using misperceptions of his own record, calling him a bigot, and using an incredibly well-funded and powerful network of hundreds, literally hundreds of liberal special interest groups to attack and destroy his reputation and his nomination. Having seen this happen, luckily the right saw that we needed to change our approach. Rather than having hands off, let's not play hardball. We want to be nice to all sides. During the Reagan administration, unfortunately, it was received wisdom that you don't fight fire with fire. So when they went on TV with $1 million ad campaigns narrating them, when on the right, you have Charlton Heston saying, hey, I'll narrate an ad. And they said, no thanks, we don't want to do that. When you had Judge Bork's own family stepping up and trying to defend him and defend his record, which was being so maligned, he actually said, no, stand down. This is not how we're going to operate. And unfortunately, what we learned is Reagan certainly did this in other areas, but unilateral disarmament is not a winning strategy. And Bork nomination taught us that. We have learned through each subsequent nomination something important about the process of how to make sure the Supreme Court gets back into constitutional stance. We learned from David Souter's nomination, for example, that trying to avoid the controversy by nominating blank slate candidates that no one will guess he's conservative. Maybe it will turn out he's not. That's what happened with Souter. So we learned something more. We need to make sure we are actually vetting people. It's not enough to have someone with an R next to his name. We need to have someone who actually has those principles. So then we come to Clarence Thomas's nomination. Wow, you just saw what we learned there. We learned that the left is willing to stop at literally nothing if it means their opportunity to defeat a nominee. So we were blindsided by the kind of smears, the kind of unfair, uncorroborated allegations that came out at the last minute, that came out that leaked improperly through Senate procedures, that turned the process into a national circus after that. Thank God, Justice Thomas was in fact confirmed, and amazingly, thank God, if you read his autobiography, you will see the amount of prayer, the personal firestorm that he went through that was really a purifying fire for him, and he came out, I think, a different person. You can't go through that unchanged. He was someone who had already experienced so much hardship and suffering and challenges in his life, but that just was the capstone of it all. At the end of his confirmation hearing, 2-1 Americans said they believed him over Anita Hill. They believed that Justice Thomas was telling the truth. They saw that powerful testimony. They saw the evidence that she was actually changing her story as she went. That no one else who worked with them saw what she was claiming, that it was at odds with whatever they knew of his character. 2-1 Americans believed him the day he was confirmed. If you took that poll today, what would those numbers look like? We have lived through decades now of a propaganda campaign by the left, by liberal academia. In our high school, this is what they're teaching our children, that Anita Hill is a brave woman who stood up against the patriarchy, not that this was a underhanded, last-minute, last-ditch effort to block what everyone knew would be a strong conservative on the court, and even more galling, a strong black conservative on the court that put the lie to their identity politics. I, having seen this as one of Justice Thomas's clerks, could see the writing on the wall last year when Kavanagh was nominated. Just like Judge Bork, who replaced a swing vote, and Justice Thomas after him, who replaced Thurgood Marshall, a very liberal justice on the court. So again, the court is shifting, things get crazy. Justice Kavanagh was replacing Justice Kennedy. So another swing vote, another seat, another high-stakes Supreme Court nomination. Going into it, even before he was nominated, all of us knew this is going to get rough. We don't know what exactly is going to happen, but we've learned from the Thomas nominee that you have to expect anything, and you have to expect last-minute hits. Watching that happen, and with JCN, one of the things that we do is we are a central kind of clearinghouse for judicial confirmation information. That is our full-time job, is judicial confirmation. So all of these other groups, so many conservative groups, realize the significance of the courts. They realize that whatever the issue is you care about, chances are the Supreme Court has done something to meddle with it. Chances are you passed some great legislation that they've then interpreted badly, that they have invented a constitutional rule that is not in the Constitution, that is somehow tying the hands of the American people in some way. So there are hundreds of conservative groups who realize the importance, but our role is to be that central group where this is our focus so that we can help communicate that to people when we are in the middle of these high-stakes battles. So with JCN, I spent that last term going on TV from the time Kennedy retired to the time Kavanagh was confirmed, over 100 different TV appearances, radio, media. We realized you can't just leave the field. You have to actually really be able to fight, and if they're going to fight campaign style, like you're going for an office, we're going to do the same. Should Supreme Court battles have to be like a political campaign? No. As Justice Scalia himself said, if you have judges who are acting like politicians, it's their policy judgments and not just the legal conclusions that are going to be ruling and become the law of the land, then yes, of course, we're going to have to treat them like politicians. If they're being politicians, that is how their nomination and their confirmation is going to be treated. And so we were out there and fighting for this whole process and saw the debacle that happened. Having watched it, and I know you all lived through that crazy whirlwind whiplash of a hearing, doing everything they could to bring the stakes higher. They were refusing to meet with the nominee until he released every single document that was in the Bush White House, even documents he hadn't seen. Absurd claim that they were making. There were 200 plus people arrested at his first hearing. A lot of us forgot that there was an initial hearing in the process. It didn't just start in September with Christine Blasey Ford's allegations. It was crazy. There were people attending these events. There were the handmade costumes. There was a guy dressed as a giant condom. Crazy people trying to say this guy's going to be the end of America as we know it. We will be all living in a Handmaid's Tale tomorrow if he is confirmed. The hyperbole and the high stakes were ridiculous, and people screaming and getting themselves arrested. You had Cory Booker, Spartacus, releasing confidential documents. I think what we saw was, after everything had been tried, including levels of craziness that no judicial nomination in American history had sunk to previously, they realized there was only one other way to go. There were people who, all along the process, had heard rumors they've got something in their back pocket. They're going to make some kind of sexual allegation, but nobody knew when or what it would be. Well, it happened in September. And this was the moment that we realized that things were going down the route that Justice Thomas had taken. After this process ended, we knew it was so crazy. Molly Hemingway and I, you probably have seen her on Fox News, we realized we had to write about it. We wanted to stop in its tracks what happened to Justice Thomas. We didn't want the left to be able to write its own revisionist history. So we have now talked to more than 100 people who were there living through this process, who were from the president, the vice president, justices on the Supreme Court, senators, their staff, people who have known Brett Kavanaugh since high school, people who have known Christine Blasey Ford since high school. And I'll tell you, we all lived through it. We thought we all knew what was happening. There's so much more to what was going on in this battle. We learned about stories of courage, really all through the process, but especially during the part of the process when it became crazy. Ashley Kavanagh, who literally, from the moment she knew there was a vacancy and her husband would be confirmed, she was praying, Lord, let this cup pass from me. She had lived through a confirmation process before with her husband. Two, in fact, he had been nominated twice because he experienced so much opposition from the Democrats even the first time he was nominated to the D.C. Circuit. We learned that those were the same words Justice Thomas himself prayed going into his own confirmation. So you can see how none of these occurs in a vacuum. It's like watching the same process. The same playbook is being played out again and again. We learned about the courage of people like Susan Collins, someone who I don't agree with all of her votes on, but having heard and talked to her about the way she approached this nomination, she's not a lawyer herself. She hired extra staff to read his record. When people would challenge her and say, well, what about his position on this issue? She'd say, oh, no, you haven't read footnote 4 in that article you wrote. She knew it cold. And she was approaching not just the first crazy part of the process with a very clear-headed, statesmanlike manner, but especially after these allegations came out. So she was one of the first senators he spoke to about it. And she was very, she didn't just go with the emotion and this would be such a horrible thing to happen to someone. And it would. We all can agree we do not want anyone sexually assaulted in the way that Christine Blasey Ford described. And this is what she went so clearly through in her speech to the Senate floor announcing her vote. The question isn't, is sexual assault a horrible thing? Yes. The question is, did he actually do this? And do we have evidence for that? The question isn't even really, did she think he did? Because we all know the vagaries of memory. And when Molly and I wrote our book, Justice on Trial, on this, we interviewed national memory expert Elizabeth Loftus to ask about what can we know from memory. That absolutely a problem and a real phenomenon, the way that memory can be massaged, changed, and malleable. So it's very possible you can have someone who is misunderstanding, not only putting aside the possibility that someone is consciously misleading about an event. But the question is, did he do it? And is there any evidence for that? And as she looked at it at the time and said, no, there isn't any corroboration, all of the evidence points the other way. And then she also saw the witness of one of the other people who has an amazing profile in courage, which is Leland Kaiser. This is the only other woman alleged to have been at the event that Christine Blasey Ford was at. She was a longtime friend of hers going back to high school. That summer, she was Christine Blasey Ford's kind of designated driver. She didn't have her driver's license yet. And also, Leland was known as being very level-headed. She wasn't a real hard partier, so she was a great designated driver to be taking her around. She's also very liberal. She didn't want to see Justice Kavanagh confirmed. When she heard she was named at this party, she initially said, "Oh, wow, I want to help my friend. I feel horrible. How can I not remember this event that must have been so traumatic for her?" So she sat down. She tried to look through her high school yearbooks and go, "Who was this guy? What was I doing that summer?" Trying to help jog my own memory, and couldn't come up with anything. So she issued a statement saying, "I don't remember this. I don't even remember meeting Brett Kavanaugh." And then she was subjected to a campaign of pressure from her common friends with Christine Blasey Ford. They thought she was betraying her friend by not effectively reaching her story, by not saying, "I remember something I don't," or by not trying to bolster this story in a way that wouldn't have been faithful to the truth. As much as they pressured her, and they even tried to suggest that they would out her for problems with addiction she had suffered in the past to try to ruin her own reputation, she's someone who stood firm. Again, even disagreeing with him, her fidelity to the truth made a huge difference in this process. And when the FBI was investigating it, she told the FBI all of these things that had happened. She said she acknowledged that she had problems with addiction, but she said, "I also want you to know what was happening, and you can judge my testimony on its own basis, but this is the pressure I was subjected to. These are the people who were taking me and saying, you need to change your story." And that FBI investigation, so many senators said, "Wow, they couldn't tell us what was in it." We learned later through other means that Kaiser's testimony was the key thing there. But they said, if you saw that, you would know why, at the end of the day, everyone who voted for him, after reading that, was even more confident. They knew this whole thing was a setup, that this was not what really happened that day. So there were some amazing voices of courage through this process. One of the things that Molly and I were concerned about after writing this book is, what do we do now? Part of it is just getting the story out there. We knew that would be important. We wanted to stave off the kind of people who have been maligning Justice Thomas for the last several years. We wanted to make sure people knew the truth from so many people who weren't able to get that truth out there because the media, we talked to a lot of people who said the media wasn't covering what we wanted to say. One of his clerks told us he would give quotes and give interviews day in and day out to media. They wouldn't print it. Friends of his said the same thing. They would never say what we said in favor of him. They only went to people who knew him distantly, who were willing to say negative things about him. One of them said, "I realized I had to just go on live TV because it was the only way they couldn't shut me up. They couldn't turn off the mic, but they would do it if it was an interview. They would just cut your part out of it if it was pre-taped." So we worried, what do we do now? We got the story out there, and I encourage you all to read it and to understand what happened so we know what the playbook is. What can we do to prevent this happening again? We're seeing now continued calls after this New York Times book came out a few weeks ago, Kavanaugh confirmation. They had another year to look into these things. There's still no corroboration. There's still no evidence for anything that these people said. But in their conclusion, they say, "But our gut tells us he did it." I'm not even paraphrasing there. They literally said it's a gut call. That's really frightening. That we have people who are ostensibly journalists. These are people who are well-funded, well-connected. One of the women, she acknowledges some of her connections. She was in his law school class, or not his law school class, his college class at Yale. So she knew all of these same friends. In fact, she called some of them up without saying she was even a reporter to try to get dirt on him, and still wasn't able to really come up with anything that corroborated these facts. So people are willing to say anything, and they're just going on gut in these things. So we need to make sure that this doesn't happen to the next person. After their book came out, there were presidential candidates, I think we're up to 7 or 9 now, who said now he needs to be impeached. He needs to be impeached over allegations that have no basis in fact, that have no corroboration, that have no substantiation. Maybe about these new allegations that they tried to plug coming out with, that they didn't mention that the woman who's supposed to be involved in the allegations herself doesn't remember anything like they're describing. This is the weakest and thinnest of reeds they are trying to attack him with. What is going on? Why are they doing this? I admit there are a couple things. They're trying to intimidate Kavanaugh himself, hoping that he'll change his post. They're trying to intimidate Chief Justice Roberts, hoping that maybe he'll try to take support out of the political crosshairs by voting the way they want to see, and they're trying to intimidate a future Supreme Court justice. There are 2 dozen men and women on that list of President Trump's. Do you think they want to put their families through this? No. So it's up to us to make sure this doesn't happen again. Know our history. I think hold people accountable for what happened. There were people who have been referred to the Department of Justice for submitting false reports to Congress. That carries a 5-year prison term. Some of these people admitted that what they said was totally false. There needs to be accountability. There needs to be accountability for the senators who broke Senate rules and procedures. Senator Feinstein held on to these allegations until the last minute and dropped them in a political manner. People who broke the rules like Cory Booker. Your own senators who are behaving badly during this process, make sure they know how you feel. And we need to make sure we are standing behind the president's great nominees going forward, because we know that this is not the last judicial nomination he will have. He has many great appellate nominees now that are going to be the bench for the next Supreme Court nominee that we're going to be drawing from. Easily in the future, have another Supreme Court vacancy, but we need to go in with our eyes open, knowing the stakes, and being prepared to defend whoever he or she is, because we can't let the left do this again.
Folks, we are so thankful for Project Veritas. We're doing a job the mainstream media refuses to do. I can remember a time when 60 Minutes built their whole brand on investigative journalism, and now they've become the very organization that they used to expose. And that's why we need organizations like Project Veritas. We're delighted to have share more about that. He's an award-winning journalist and writer. He's the founder and president of Project Veritas, the nonprofit organization. And Project Veritas Action is dedicated to investing corruption, dishonesty, waste, and fraud in both public and private institutions. These investigations have prompted voter ID laws, federal and state investigations, arrests, the defunding of ACORN, removal of 2 executives from National Public Radio, which is a little more than a super PAC for the Democratic Party. In 2013, he authored a New York Times bestseller called Breakthrough, Our Guerrilla War to Expose Fraud and Save Democracy. And in 2018, he authored America Pravda, My Fight for the Truth in the Era of Fake News. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome James O'Keefe.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I never thought I'd be standing here 10 years ago, and I'm going to tell you a story that's pretty unbelievable. As you can see, Project Veritas, be brave, do something, is our motto. We believe in citizen empowerment. We believe in equipping these citizens with little hitch cameras, blowing the whistle on government institutions. And as you can see, 10 years ago, I met a young woman on Facebook. She sent me a message out of nowhere, and she said, have you ever thought about doing some of your undercover work into ACORN? And I didn't even know what ACORN was. I had to YouTube it and found videos of them going and busting down doors of foreclosed homes. This young woman, I've never met this person before, she sent me a series of messages saying, what if you went in there and said that you were a prostitute? This is a crazy idea, right? Well, I thought it was a good idea. You would test whether or not ACORN would be willing to break the law. Would they be willing to help this prostitution business with government funds? I asked her, would you be willing to play the role of that prostitute? I said it might be good to have a pimp in this scenario. And Hannah Giles, the young woman I had never met before, said, yes, I would like to do it. I then asked my grandmother, who I was living with at the time, do you have a fur coat that I could wear for this thing? And my grandmother said, I don't know what is wrong with you or what's going on, but she put on my bed, because I was living with my grandparents at the time, she put on my bed a chinchilla shawl coat. And Hannah was dressed like that. I was dressed like this. There we were, 2 kids from the cast of High School Musical 3 with a video camera and their grandmother's chinchilla coat. And we had no organization, no money, no donors. We had nothing but a dream to do the work that the media was not willing to do. We were so upset, frustrated, contemptuous of the press, which had scooped, which had spiked stories on ACORN. And we walked into these offices across the United States. She wore the pimp fur on herself. And we talked to these workers. We were very nervous, very scared, but we went in there undercover and caught these workers telling us these things, telling us these unbelievable things about how to disguise the prostitution business, about how to claim you're not a prostitute but a performing artist.
I want to make sure there's a code for it, okay?
A code for prostitution?
You might have to name it something else. Performance arts, let's see. Independent arts. You can be that. Your business is a performing artist. But you are. Okay, so you're not lying. So stop saying.
At this point, I'm thinking, what more could I say? I'm sitting behind the desk trying to improvise a fraudulent scheme, and we know we have 13 underage prostitutes that we've shipped into the United States illegally and want to profit off of them. Maybe that will be the line that's too far for them to go, but nothing seems to shock these people.
There's going to be 13 El Salvadorian girls coming into this house saying you're very young. We don't want to put them on the books.
Please tell me 13 underage Salvadorian sex slaves is the lie.
I support us to return. You can use them as a dependent. So, you can use them as a dependent because they live in the house.
Are you kidding me? I had nothing. I had stayed up all night editing these tapes. The story blew up. There's a picture of me the morning it broke, and me and my grandfather provided the hat that I wore into these videos. But we kept releasing more tapes. I met this guy, Andrew Breitbart, and Andrew said to me, they're going to say it's an isolated incident. And he said, but you have all these tapes, so it's actually going to embarrass the New York Times. He said, you're going to embarrass the New York Times. I said, why? He said, because when this is all said and done, the New York Times is going to apologize to their readers. I said, okay, we'll see what happens. We released the second tape in Washington, D.C.
My girlfriend's a prostitute.
Okay.
And I don't know if
I kind of figured that.
I'm using the money that she's getting. You know what I mean?
Right, but when these actions, you don't know where it's coming from. That's what we're trying to tell you. All right, we're looking out for you.
Okay, that's neat. Well, by the way, the New York Post put, this is a big story, the New York Post put it on the cover 2 days in a row. When we went to New York, they told us to bury our illicit prostitution proceeds in a tin can and put grass over it.
Right in the house, with a backyard. You put food right in there, put the language that is in the soul, but yourself, where it is.
Right. And I put the money in the
And then put it in there, I put it in the grass, put that, put the grass over.
This story was big. It blew up. An extraordinary series of events, just as Andrew Breitbart had predicted. Official Washington responded, even before any reporters did. The House of Representatives voted, this was in 2009, in a democratically controlled House and Senate. The vote was 345 to 75. The Senate voted to defund ACORN 83-7, a sphere of consensus unheard of. I'm not even sure Republicans can do that. And this all happened, and President Obama even signed the legislation defunding ACORN.
What I noticed is that what I saw on that video was certainly inappropriate.
Inappropriate. And then something really extraordinary happened. The New York Times, on September 26, 2009, apologized to their readers, just as Andrew Breitbart had predicted. Clark Wheat, then ombudsman for the New York Times, said, quote, the Times needs to be alert to these sorts of things or wind up looking clueless, or worse, partisans. The apology titled, Tuning In Too Late, didn't you think? I don't know what's worse, what the people did or what the media is doing. Project Veritas was born, and 100 investigations later, fast forward 6 years, Project Veritas breaks maybe the biggest story of them all. In the 2016 election, with Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, we had sent undercover agents into the Hillary Clinton campaign and caught these individuals inciting violence at Trump rallies. It even forced Anderson Cooper to acknowledge it, although he got a dig in at the end.
Video emerging of a group of pro-Clinton political operatives talking about stirring up trouble and provoking violence at Trump rallies. The video comes from Project Veritas, brainchild of James O'Keefe, who's got a less than stellar reputation for accuracy.
They gotta get that little dig in. Where's the lie? Where's the edit? Name the lie. We don't report anything unless you can see and hear the person and see their lips moving. And the mainstream press uses anonymous sources. They ask you to trust them when they've given us no reason to trust them. Bob Woodward, who's the supposed legend, he quotes people anonymously who themselves are quoting other people a hearsay, and then he puts that in quotes. We can't do that. And you look at these people and what they did and what they said. This is not anonymously sourced allegations. These are people who worked in and around Hillary's campaign in their own words, describing what they do. I'm sorry this is so graphic, but this is who these people really are.